Every day you're bleeding power and you don't even know it. It leaks out when you over-explain, when you apologize before you've done anything wrong, when your eyes break first, when silence makes you so uncomfortable that you fill it with nervous noise, and you feel it afterward, that strange exhaustion, that sense of having given too much to a conversation that gave nothing back. You walk away feeling smaller than when you arrived. But here's what Carl Jung noticed about the people who never seem to shrink. The ones who walk into rooms and somehow settle them. The ones whose silence feels more powerful than most people's words. They're not doing more than you. They're doing almost nothing. And that nothing, that's everything. Today I'm going to show you why calmness isn't just a mood. It's a psychological weapon that most people hand directly to everyone around them. And more importantly, I'll show you how to stop giving it away. So stay until the end, because if you've ever left a conversation feeling drained, invisible, or strangely defeated without knowing why, you're about to understand exactly what happened. And you're going to learn how to make sure it never happens again. Before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And leave me a comment. Have you ever met someone whose calm presence made you feel almost nervous? Someone who seemed to control the room without trying? I want to hear your experience. Let's start with something uncomfortable, something you may have sensed but never fully admitted to yourself. You have been trained since childhood to give your power away. Think about it. What were you taught to do when you felt uncertain? Speak up. Fill the gap. Show enthusiasm. Prove yourself. Make others comfortable. Smile even when you don't feel like smiling. Explain your reasoning before anyone asks. Justify your presence. And what happens when you do all of this? You become exhausting to be around. Not because you're a bad person, but because you're constantly outputting. You're a radio station that never stops broadcasting, and people can feel it. They may not have words for what they're feeling, but their nervous system knows. This person is trying too hard. This person wants something from me. This person does not feel settled in themselves, and so without meaning to, without even being conscious of it, they start to pull back. They give you less attention, less respect, less trust. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because your energy told them a story before your words ever could. Jung understood that human beings communicate on levels far deeper than language. The unconscious mind is always reading the room. It's scanning for threat, for authenticity, for stability. And when it encounters someone who is genuinely calm, someone who is not performing or seeking or proving, something shifts. The unconscious relaxes. It feels safe. And paradoxically, it pays attention. This is the first secret of presence. The less you chase attention, the more it follows you. The less you need approval, the more freely others give it. The less you try to control the room, the more the room orients itself around you. But here's the problem: you cannot fake this. You cannot pretend to be calm. You cannot perform stillness, because the unconscious sees through performance instantly. It was designed over millions of years to detect deception, incongruence, hidden agendas. You can fool someone's conscious mind with the right words. You will never fool their unconscious with the wrong energy. So the question becomes something much deeper than technique. It's not about what you do with your hands, or how long you hold eye contact, or when you pause for effect. Those are just symptoms. The real question is this: how do you become genuinely calm? How do you stop leaking power at the source? That's what we're going to explore today. Not tricks, not tactics, but the psychological architecture of true presence. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. The kind that changes the room just by entering it. Let's go deeper. There is a concept in Jungian psychology called the persona, and understanding it will change how you see yourself in every social situation for the rest of your life. The persona is the mask you wear. It's the version of you that you present to the world. The self you've constructed to be acceptable, likable, successful, safe. It's not entirely false. Parts of it are genuinely you, but it's also not the whole truth. It's a curated self, an edited self, a self designed to navigate the expectations of others. And here's the thing. The persona costs energy, enormous amounts of energy. Every moment you spend maintaining it, performing it, worrying about whether it's working, you are draining your psychological reserves. You are spending so much energy managing how you appear that you have nothing left for how you actually are. This is why social situations exhaust certain people so completely. Not because they're weak or flawed, but because they're running two operating systems at once. There's the real self underneath, with its doubts and fears and unfiltered thoughts. And there's the persona on top, trying to smooth everything over, say the right thing, make the right impression. The gap between these two is where your power leaks out. Jung saw this clearly. He wrote that the persona is a necessary compromise between the individual and society. You need some version of a social self. You can't walk around completely unfiltered. But he also warned that when people identify too strongly with their persona, when they mistake the mask for their true face, they become hollow. They become anxious. They become perpetually exhausted by the performance of being themselves, and others can feel this hollowness. They sense that something is off. They don't trust the performance, even if they can't say why. Because underneath the polished surface, they detect the strain, the trying, the wanting. Now think about someone who is genuinely calm, someone whose presence feels settled and real. What's different about them? The gap is smaller, or perhaps it's gone entirely. They are not running two systems. They are not performing one thing while feeling another. What you see is close to what they are, and that congruence, that alignment between inner and outer, creates an almost magnetic effect. You feel like you're meeting a real person, not a presentation, not a carefully managed image, but someone who has nothing to prove and nothing to hide. Someone who is simply there, fully, without apology. This is what Jung meant when he talked about integrating the personality. It's not about eliminating the persona entirely. It's about closing the gap, bringing the mask and the face closer together until the energy you spend performing drops to almost nothing. And when that energy is freed up, something remarkable happens. You become calm, naturally, without trying, because calmness is not something you add. It's what remains when you stop subtracting from yourself. It's your natural state when you stop exhausting yourself with performance, when you stop leaking power through the cracks between who you are and who you're pretending to be. But closing that gap requires something most people are terrified to do. It requires meeting your shadow. The shadow is perhaps Jung's most famous concept, and also his most misunderstood. Most people think the shadow is the dark side, the evil twin, the part of you that wants bad things. And yes, the shadow can contain darkness, aggression, selfishness, desires you've been taught to suppress. But that's only part of the story. The shadow is simply everything about yourself that you've pushed out of awareness. Everything you've decided is not acceptable, not appropriate, not you. And some of what lives in the shadow is not dark at all. Your power might be in the shadow. Your authentic voice, your real opinions, your capacity for anger, for boundary setting, for saying no. your sexuality, your ambition, your weird humor, your unpopular beliefs. Anything that didn't fit the persona got exiled to the shadow, and it's still there, living beneath the surface, influencing everything you do. Here's what Jung understood. The shadow doesn't disappear just because you've hidden it. It shows up anyway. But it shows up sideways in ways you can't control. It shows up as anxiety when you can't explain why you're nervous. It shows up as that tightness in your chest when someone asks your opinion and you don't know what you're allowed to say. It shows up as that strange irritation when you meet someone who expresses the very things you suppressed in yourself. And here's the part that connects to presence. A person who is at war with their shadow cannot be calm. It's impossible, because part of their energy is always being used to keep things hidden, to maintain the walls, to patrol the borders between acceptable and unacceptable parts of the self. This is exhausting, and it's destabilizing, because you never know when something might slip through. You never know when the mask might crack, so you stay vigilant, tight, controlled. And people feel that too. They sense the guardedness, the walls, the parts of you that are off limits. It creates a subtle unease, a sense that they're not meeting all of you, that something is being held back. Compare this to someone who has integrated their shadow, someone who knows their own darkness and isn't afraid of it, someone who has faced the parts of themselves they were taught to hide and found that they could survive the encounter. This person has nothing to defend, no secret selves to protect, no constant vigilance against exposure, and so they can relax, truly relax. Not the performed relaxation of someone who is trying to appear confident, but the bone deep settledness of someone who has made peace with their own complexity. This is where real calm comes from, not from controlling yourself more perfectly, but from accepting yourself more completely, from integrating the very things you've spent your life running from. And when you stop running, you stop leaking. The power that was going into self-suppression becomes available for other things, like presence, like listening, like actually being in the room instead of managing how you appear in the room. Jung said that the shadow, when confronted, becomes a source of renewal and strength. When you stop fighting parts of yourself, you get that energy back. And you also gain something else. You gain depth, substance, gravity. People who have done shadow work feel different. They feel more real, more dimensional. You sense that they've been somewhere, that they've faced something, that they're not just skating along the surface of their own personality. This is why calm people are often the ones who have suffered, who have struggled, who have been forced to confront parts of themselves they would have preferred to ignore. The confrontation didn't break them. It deepened them. And that depth is what you feel when you're in their presence. So, if you want to become genuinely calm, the path leads inward. It leads toward the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. The work is not comfortable, but the reward is something that cannot be faked, a settledness that comes from having nothing left to hide. Let me tell you about stillness and why it terrifies most people. We live in a culture of constant motion, constant stimulation, constant noise, and there's a reason for that. Stillness is confrontational. When you stop moving, when you stop distracting yourself, you come face to face with whatever you've been running from. This is why people reach for their phones the moment they feel bored. This is why silence in conversation feels so unbearable. This is why being alone with your thoughts, without entertainment or tasks or plans, feels almost physically uncomfortable. You're not afraid of the stillness itself. You're afraid of what the stillness reveals. And what does it reveal? Whatever is unresolved in you, whatever is unfelt, whatever has been pushed down and covered over, the grief you haven't processed, the anger you haven't expressed, the fear you haven't faced, the questions you haven't answered. Stillness is a mirror, and most people do not want to see what's in it. But here's the paradox. The very thing you're running from is the source of your power, because when you finally stop, when you finally allow the stillness, when you finally face what's in the mirror, something begins to shift. The charge starts to dissipate. The things you've been avoiding start to lose their grip on you, not because you've solved them or fixed them, but because you finally acknowledge them. You've stopped a war. You've ended the resistance. And in that ending, energy becomes available. The energy that was going into running, avoiding, suppressing, distracting, all of that comes back to you, and with it comes calm. Jung believed that the psyche naturally moves toward wholeness. It wants to integrate, it wants to heal, but it can only do this when you cooperate, when you stop running and start listening. This is why meditation works. Not because of any mystical property, but because it's structured stillness. It's time set aside to not run, to not distract, to simply be present with whatever arises, and over time, something changes. The thoughts that once tormented you become less compelling. The emotions that once overwhelmed you become more manageable. Not because they've disappeared, but because you've changed your relationship to them. You've stopped treating them as emergencies. You've stopped treating your inner life as a problem to be solved. And from this new relationship comes a different quality of being, a quietness that is not emptiness, a settledness that is not denial, a presence that does not need to perform or prove. This is what people feel when they meet someone who meditates deeply, or who has done serious inner work, or who has simply lived enough life and processed it honestly to arrive at some version of peace. They feel the stillness, and it affects them. It calms their nervous system. It makes them want to be close to it, because stillness, real stillness, is rare. And the unconscious recognizes it instantly. So the question becomes practical. How do you cultivate stillness? How do you build this capacity for calm presence in a world that seems designed to prevent it? And the answer is simple, though not easy. You practice. You create spaces in your life where you are not doing anything, where you are not consuming anything, where you are not trying to be anything. You sit with yourself. You walk without your phone. You let the silence be uncomfortable, and you stay anyway. At first, it will be hard. You'll feel the pull toward distraction. You'll feel the anxiety of not producing, not achieving, not filling the time. But if you stay with it, something will shift. The nervous system will begin to recalibrate. The need for constant stimulation will start to fade, and in its place you'll find a different mode of being, a mode where you are not running, where you are not chasing, where you are simply here. That's the foundation. Everything else builds on top of it. Now let's talk about what happens when you bring this stillness into the world. When you take this inner work and let it express through your presence, there is a concept that Jung wrote about called the self with a capital S. This is different from the ego, the small self that worries and plans and tries to manage impressions. The self is the totality of your being, the center around which everything revolves. The part of you that is connected to something larger than your individual concerns. When you are operating from the self, you feel different, and you show up differently. There's less grasping, less needing, less of that frantic energy that pushes people away even while it's trying to pull them in. And here's what's remarkable. When you show up from this place, you don't need to dominate anything. You don't need to control conversations or impress people or manage outcomes. The power takes care of itself because you're not leaking anymore. You're not performing anymore. You're just there, fully, completely. And that fullness has weight. It has gravity. People feel it. Think about what happens when someone is truly listening to you, not waiting to talk, not formulating their response, not half distracted by their phone or their thoughts or their plans, but actually listening, completely present to what you're saying. How does that feel? It feels almost startling because it's so rare. Because most people are so lost in their own concerns that they barely register you at all. But this person is different. This person is here, and suddenly you feel seen. You feel important. You feel like you matter. That's the power of presence, and it comes from stillness. It comes from having done enough inner work that you can actually set yourself aside and be fully available to what's in front of you. Most people cannot do this. They are too busy running their internal programs, managing their anxiety, planning what they'll say next, worrying about how they're being perceived. There's no space left for actual presence because all the space is taken up by the performance of presence. But when you've cultivated real stillness, the performance becomes unnecessary. You don't need to prove you're listening because you actually are listening. You don't need to demonstrate interest because you actually are interested. The doing falls away and the being remains, and people respond to this, not because you've mastered some technique, but because you're offering them something they almost never receive: full attention, undivided presence, the experience of being truly seen. This is what it means to dominate without saying a word. It's not about intimidation or power games or psychological tactics. It's about being so fully present that your presence itself becomes the communication. And that communication says something that words never could. I am here, I am stable, I am not going anywhere. You have my complete attention. In a world of distraction and fragmentation, this is almost unbearably rare. And rarity is its own kind of power. Let's talk about what happens in difficult conversations when you bring this quality of presence. Most people, when they feel challenged or criticized or threatened, immediately go into reaction. They defend, they attack, they explain, they justify. They raise their voice or cross their arms or suddenly become very interested in changing the subject. And all of this is leakage. All of this broadcasts that you've been destabilized, that the other person has gotten to you, that you don't have a solid foundation. But what happens when you don't react? What happens when someone comes at you with criticism or aggression or manipulation and you simply remain calm? Something very interesting happens. Their attack loses its landing place. It's like throwing a punch at water. There's nothing solid to hit, nothing to push against. The energy goes out from them and finds no resistance. And that's disorienting for them, because most people expect reactions. They expect to get a rise out of you. They expect the usual dance of attack and defense. When you don't give them that, they don't know what to do. The interaction is suddenly outside their script. Jung wrote about this in a different way. He talked about how projection works in relationships. People project their own unresolved material onto you. They see their fears, their insecurities, their expectations, and they treat you as if you are those projections. But when you're grounded in your center, when you're operating from a place of stillness, you don't have to accept those projections. They come toward you and they pass right through. You see them for what they are. Not truth about you, but information about the other person's inner state. And when you can see clearly like this, You can respond instead of react. You can choose what to do rather than being controlled by the emotional intensity of the moment. You become, in a very real sense, unmanipulable, because manipulation only works on people who are destabilized, people who can be triggered, people who are not solid. Calmness is that solidity. It's not about suppressing your emotions or pretending you don't have feelings. It's about having such a strong relationship with your center that nothing can knock you off it for long. Things might land, things might affect you, but you return to baseline quickly. You don't get hijacked. And people learn this about you. They sense it. And it changes how they treat you. They stop testing as much because the tests don't work. They stop pushing because the pushing doesn't move you. They start to respect you, not because you've demanded respect, but because you've demanded respect, but because you've demonstrated a quality that demands itself. This doesn't happen overnight. It takes time to build this kind of stability. It takes doing the inner work we've talked about, facing the shadow, closing the gap between persona and self, developing the capacity for stillness, but it compounds. Every time you practice non-reactivity, it gets a little easier. Every time you stay centered in a storm, your center gets a little stronger. And eventually, it becomes second nature. Not something you do, but something you are. And that's when the real power emerges. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. The kind that speaks through silence. I want to talk now about the energy of needing nothing. There is a quality that some people carry. It's subtle but unmistakable. When you're around them, you feel like they want nothing from you. They're not trying to impress you. They're not seeking your approval. They're not hoping you'll like them or validate them or give them anything at all. They're simply there, complete in themselves, available for connection but not hungry for it. This is extraordinarily rare and extraordinarily powerful because most human interaction is secretly transactional. Most people want something from you even if they don't admit it to themselves. They want you to laugh at their jokes. They want you to think they're smart. They want you to notice them, include them, affirm them, and you can feel this wanting. It's in their energy. It's in how they lean toward you, how they study your face for reactions, how they adjust themselves based on what they think you want. This is normal. This is human. But it's also a form of leakage, because every time you need something from someone, you give them power over you. You make yourself dependent on their response, and something in you tightens, becomes vigilant, starts managing the interaction to get the outcome you need. But the person who needs nothing, they can't be manipulated this way. They can't be controlled with approval or threatened with rejection because they're not playing that game. They already have what they need. It's coming from inside. Jung talked about this in terms of the source of psychological energy. He observed that some people draw their vitality from external sources. They need feedback, attention, stimulation from outside. Without it, they feel empty, depleted. But others have learned to connect to an internal source. Their energy comes from somewhere deeper, from their relationship with themselves, from their connection to something larger, from the work they've done to become whole. These are the people who can be alone without being lonely, who can lose without being destroyed, who can be criticized without crumbling, because their foundation is inside. It doesn't depend on what you give them. And paradoxically, this makes them incredibly attractive, because there's no pressure, no pull, no subtle desperation in the interaction. You're free to engage with them however you want, because they're not trying to shape your response. This freedom is intoxicating, and it draws people in. So the question becomes, how do you develop this internal source? How do you become someone who needs nothing from others? And the answer loops back to everything we've discussed. Shadow work gives you back the parts of yourself you've been seeking from others. Acceptance, power, permission. Integration closes the gap that makes you leak energy seeking external validation. Stillness connects you to a source deeper than any external feedback. It's a process of becoming complete in yourself, not isolated, not walled off, but whole, able to engage with others from fullness rather than emptiness. This is the ultimate foundation of calm presence. When you need nothing, you have nothing to protect. When you have nothing to protect, you have nothing to protect. You have nothing to lose. When you have nothing to lose, you can be completely present without agenda. And that presence speaks louder than any words ever could. Let me talk about breathing. This might seem basic, but stay with me. Most people breathe wrong. They breathe from the top of their chest. They breathe shallowly and quickly. They hold their breath when they're stressed without even realizing it. And this pattern of breathing constantly signals to the nervous system that something is wrong. Your physiology and your psychology are not separate things. They're intimately connected. When your body is in a stress state, your mind follows. When your breath is tight and shallow, your thoughts become tight and shallow. When your nervous system is activated, your capacity for calm presence disappears. This is why the simplest intervention for anxiety is to slow your breathing. It's not a trick, it's biology. Deep, slow breath activates the parasympathetic nervous system. It literally changes your physiological state. And when your physiology shifts, your psychology shifts with it. People who carry natural presence are almost always deep breathers. Their bodies are in a relaxed state, and that relaxed state broadcasts through everything they do. Their voice is lower and calmer because their diaphragm is relaxed. Their movements are slower and more deliberate because they're not running on adrenaline. Their eyes are softer because they're not in a defensive posture. You can feel this when you're around them. Something in your own body relaxes in response because nervous systems entrain to each other. We unconsciously match the physiological state of the people we're with. This is why anxious people make you anxious. This is why calm people calm you down. It's not just psychological, it's biological. So if you want to develop presence, start with your body. Start with your breath. Start with learning to recognize when you're in a stress state and deliberately shifting out of it. This sounds simple, but it requires awareness. Most people are so disconnected from their bodies that they don't even notice when they're tense. They walk around with clenched jaws and tight shoulders and held breath, and they've been doing it so long it feels normal. The first step is just to notice, to start paying attention to what your body is doing. Are you holding tension somewhere? Is your breath shallow? Are your shoulders up around your ears? And then the second step is to release. Consciously, deliberately, drop your shoulders, unclench your jaw. Take a deep breath all the way down into your belly, and then let it out slowly. Do this enough times and it becomes automatic. Your body learns a new baseline, and from that new baseline, presence becomes possible. Not as something you perform, but as something you naturally express. This is the somatic foundation of everything we've been talking about. You cannot be psychologically calm if you are physiologically activated. The body comes first. Learn to regulate your body and your mind will follow. Now let's discuss the voice, because the voice is where presence either lands or falls apart. You can do all the inner work in the world, but if your voice is tight and high and rushed, you will not communicate power. The voice is the delivery mechanism. It's how your internal state reaches the external world. And here's what most people don't understand. The voice doesn't lie. You can control your words carefully, but the quality of your voice reveals your actual state. It reveals whether you're nervous or confident, whether you're grounded or destabilized, whether you're speaking from your center or from your persona. Think about the difference between a voice that comes from the chest and a voice that comes from the throat. The throat voice is tight, thin, controlled. It signals constraint, something held back. The chest voice is full, resonant, relaxed. It signals freedom, nothing to hide. Think about the difference between fast speech and slow speech. Fast speech often signals anxiety, a need to get the words out before you're interrupted, a fear that if you pause, you'll lose your audience. Slow speech signals the opposite. I'm in no rush. I'm not worried about holding your attention. I trust that what I have to say is worth waiting for. Think about the difference between a voice that goes up at the end of sentences and a voice that goes down. The upward inflection seeks validation. It turns statements into questions. It asks for permission. The downward inflection states truth. It needs no confirmation. It lands. These are small things, but they accumulate into an overall impression. And that impression either supports your presence or undermines it. The good news is that voice can be trained, not to sound artificial or affected, but to express more fully what's actually inside you. Because usually the problem isn't that you don't have depth. The problem is that your voice isn't conveying the depth you have. Breath is the foundation of voice. When you breathe deeply, your voice naturally drops and becomes more resonant. When you speak from a relaxed body, the tension leaves your throat and your words flow more easily. And then there's tempo, learning to slow down, learning to pause, learning to let silence do some of the work. Most people are terrified of pausing because they think they'll lose the other person, but the opposite is true. Pauses create anticipation. They signal that what comes next matters. They show that you're comfortable enough in your own skin to not fill every second with sound. Watch anyone with real presence speak. They pause, sometimes for what feels like an uncomfortably long time. And you lean in, you wait. Because the pause tells you that something is coming. This is the opposite of nervous chatter. Nervous chatter fills space out of fear. Confident pause claims space out of knowing. So practice this. Practice slowing down. Practice pausing before you speak. Practice letting your voice drop into your chest, not as a performance, but as an expression of the groundedness you're cultivating inside. The voice will follow the inner state, but you can also work it from the outside in. Sometimes changing how you speak helps change how you feel. The relationship goes both ways. Let's talk about eyes now, because the eyes are where presence lives most visibly. You know the feeling of meeting someone whose gaze is unstable. Their eyes dart around. They look away when you look at them. They seem to be processing something internally rather than meeting you externally. And something in you registers this as untrustworthiness, not because they're lying necessarily, but because they don't seem settled. They don't seem fully here. Compare this to someone whose gaze is steady, who looks at you directly, who doesn't look away when you look at them, who seems completely comfortable meeting your eyes for as long as the conversation lasts. This is disarming and powerful, because direct eye contact is vulnerable. It's exposing. It says, I have nothing to hide and I'm not afraid of being seen. Most people avoid deep eye contact because it feels too intimate, too confrontational, too real. So they glance and look away. They maintain what might be called social eye contact, enough to seem polite, but not enough to actually connect. But presence requires more than this. Presence requires being willing to actually meet someone, to let them see you while you see them, to not flinch from the intensity of real human contact. This doesn't mean staring aggressively. There's a quality of softness in truly present eye contact. It's not a challenge. It's an invitation. It says, I'm here and I see you, and neither of us needs to be afraid of this moment. And here's what happens when you do this. People feel seen, really seen. And that feeling is so rare and so valuable that they remember you. They trust you. They feel like something real happened in the interaction. This takes practice if you're not used to it. It can feel uncomfortable at first, but like everything else we've discussed, it builds. You develop the capacity, and eventually it becomes natural. Jung wrote about the shadow being present in the eyes, about how you can see someone's wholeness or fragmentation in their gaze. People who have done the inner work have a different quality in their eyes. Depth, solidity, a kind of settled weight. You can't fake this. It comes from the inside. But you can practice the mechanics while you do the inner work. Let your gaze be soft but steady. Don't be the first to look away. Trust that you can handle the intensity of real eye contact. And watch what happens. Watch how people respond. Watch how people respond. Watch how the quality of your interactions changes when you're actually present instead of half there. I want to return to something important, the relationship between power and peace. In the conventional understanding, these are opposites. Power is aggressive, forceful, dominating. Peace is passive, yielding, soft. You have to choose one or the other. But Jung saw something different. He saw that real power comes from peace, that the most influential people are often the most centered. That force is actually a sign of weakness because it reveals that you couldn't accomplish your aims any other way. Think about this in practical terms. When do people use force? When they feel threatened. When they feel out of control. When subtler means have failed. Force is a last resort for people who have run out of better options. But the person who is genuinely calm has more options. They can respond instead of react. They can choose their approach. They're not controlled by their emotions or their triggers or their need for immediate resolution. They can wait. They can let things unfold. They can trust the process. This is power, real power. The power to remain yourself regardless of external circumstances. The power to not be moved unless you choose to be moved. The power to influence through presence rather than pressure. And this power is inherently peaceful. It's not aggressive because it doesn't need to be. It's not forceful because force would be redundant. It already has what it needs. It already is what it needs. This might sound paradoxical. How can you dominate without exerting dominance? How can you influence without trying to influence? But think about the people who have most shaped your life. Were they the loudest ones, the most aggressive, the ones who pushed hardest? Usually not. Usually the people who influenced you most deeply were the ones who embodied something, who showed you by example rather than telling you by force, who invited rather than demanded, who gave you space to discover rather than insisting you comply. That's what calm presence does. It invites, it opens, it creates space for something to happen. And that space is where transformation occurs. Jung understood that the unconscious cannot be forced. You can't bully yourself into growth. You can't intimidate your way to wholeness. The psyche only opens when it feels safe, and it only feels safe in the presence of non-threatening awareness. The same principle applies to your influence on others. Their unconscious is reading you constantly, and if it senses aggression, pushing, forcing, it closes down, it defends, it resists. But if it senses calm, openness, groundedness, it relaxes, it becomes receptive, it's willing to be influenced. This is the subtle art of dominating without saying a word. You don't overpower. You become so anchored that others choose to orient around you. You don't push. You attract. You don't demand. You invite. And because they chose it, because they weren't forced, the influence goes deeper. It lasts longer. It becomes part of them. Let me talk about what gets in the way. Because if this were easy, everyone would already be doing it. The main obstacle to presence is internal noise, the constant commentary running in your head, the judgments, the worries, the planning, the rehearsing, the analyzing. All of this activity takes you out of the present moment and into a mental construct. You're in the conversation, but you're not really there. Part of you is thinking about what you'll say next. Part of you is evaluating how it's going. Part of you is comparing this to other conversations. Part of you is wondering what the other person thinks of you. With all that activity, how could you be fully present? There's no room. Your awareness is fragmented across a dozen concerns, none of them actually happening now. Jung called this identification with the ego, the small self with all its concerns and strategies. When you're identified with the ego, you're trapped in its perspective. You see everything through the lens of how it affects you, what it means for you, what you should do about it. But there's another possibility, what Jung called operating from the self, the larger center, the place of witnessing rather than reacting. And from this place, the mental noise quiets, not because you suppress it, but because you're no longer feeding it with attention. This is what meditation practices develop. The capacity to observe thoughts without being controlled by them, to notice the commentary without believing it's all true, to create space between stimulus and response. And this space is where presence lives. It's the gap where you can choose, where you're not just automatically reacting based on your conditioning, where you can actually be with what's happening instead of being with your interpretation of what's happening. Building this capacity takes time. The identification with thought is deeply ingrained. You've spent your whole life believing you are your thoughts. Realizing that you're the awareness, having the thoughts, is a profound shift. But even a little bit of this shift makes a huge difference. Even a moment of stepping back from the mental noise creates space for genuine presence, and these moments accumulate, they build. Eventually they become your new baseline. This is the inner work that can't be skipped. You can learn all the techniques for appearing calm. You can perfect your body language and your voice and your eye contact. But if you're still drowning in mental noise, it will leak through. The unconscious sees through performance. So the real practice is inside. It's developing a different relationship to your own mind. It's learning to not be hijacked by every thought and emotion. It's cultivating the witness who can observe without being swept away. And from this place of observation, calmness arises naturally, not as something you do, but as something you are. Let's talk about what Jung called the transcendent function. This is one of his most powerful ideas, and it relates directly to presence. The transcendent function is what emerges when opposing forces within the psyche come into dialogue, when the conscious and unconscious communicate, when the persona and shadow meet, when opposites within you stop warring and start integrating, What emerges from this dialogue is something new, something that transcends both sides, a third thing that couldn't have been predicted from either position alone. And when this happens, there's a release. The energy that was going into internal conflict becomes available for other things. You stop fighting yourself and start becoming yourself. This is the source of the profound calm that some people carry. They've done enough inner work that the major wars are over. They're not still battling their shadow, denying their darkness, defending against their own nature. They've made peace, not a superficial peace, but a deep resolution. And this peace radiates outward. You feel it when you're around them. Something is resolved in this person. They're not at war with themselves. And because they're not at war, they have energy available for genuine presence. Most people are exhausted not by life, but by their internal conflicts, by fighting parts of themselves, by trying to be other than they are, by maintaining separation between acceptable and unacceptable, persona and shadow, who they are and who they think they should be. This fighting depletes everything. There's nothing left for presence, because presence requires wholeness. You can't be fully here if parts of you are locked in combat with other parts. So the work of integration, the work of bringing opposing forces into dialogue, is directly connected to the development of presence. Every piece of shadow you reclaim, every false division you heal, every internal war you end releases energy, and that energy shows up as aliveness, as groundedness, as calm. Jung believed this work was the great task of human life, becoming whole, integrating what was divided, allowing the transcendent function to create new unity. And people who are doing this work, or who have done it, feel different to be around. They feel solid. They feel real. They feel like they're actually here, not somewhere else fighting battles you can't see. That's presence, not a technique, not a strategy, but the natural byproduct of becoming who you were always meant to be. I want to address something practical. How do you apply this in difficult moments? Because it's one thing to be calm when nothing is challenging you. It's another thing entirely to maintain presence when someone is attacking you, when things are falling apart, when stress is high and stakes are real. And the honest answer is that you won't always succeed. Presence is not a permanent achievement. It's a practice. Sometimes you'll be triggered and you'll lose your center. Sometimes you'll react before you even realize what happened. But the difference between someone who has done this work and someone who hasn't is what happens next. The person with developed presence recovers quickly. They notice they've been triggered and they return to center. They don't beat themselves up for losing it. They don't spiral into more reactivity about their reactivity. This is crucial. Presence isn't about never being disturbed. It's about having a strong enough relationship with your center that you return to it naturally. It's about the baseline being calm, so that even when you're knocked off, you know the way back. And with practice, the recovery time shortens. At first, you might be triggered for hours or days, then for minutes, eventually for seconds. You feel the destabilization, and almost immediately you're back. This is what regulation looks like. Not perfect control, but quick recovery, a strong attractor state of calmness that pulls you back, even when you've been moved away. The way you develop this is through practice, through intentionally bringing awareness to your state, through noticing when you're dysregulated and consciously choosing to return. At first, this takes effort. Eventually, it becomes automatic. Your nervous system learns the pattern, and there are specific practices that help. breathing exercises that activate the parasympathetic system, body awareness practices that keep you connected to physical sensation, mental techniques for stepping back from reactive thoughts. But underneath all techniques is the same principle: awareness, noticing what's happening in you, not being so identified with your state that you can't see it. This witness awareness is the foundation of all regulation. When you can observe your own reactivity, you're already partially free of it. So in difficult moments, the first move is always to notice, to step back, even slightly, from the storm, to say to yourself, I am triggered, I am reactive, this is happening. That noticing creates space, and in that space you can choose to breathe, choose to soften, choose to pause before responding, choose to speak from a deeper place than your immediate reaction. These choices, made over and over, build presence. They train your system. They establish new patterns. And eventually what once required conscious effort becomes your natural way of being. Let me talk about patience, because becoming genuinely calm takes time, and most people give up too soon. We live in a culture of quick fixes, instant transformation, overnight results, and this culture has infected our approach to inner work. People expect to do a weekend retreat and emerge as enlightened masters. They expect to read a book and be transformed. They expect the answer to arrive immediately or not at all. But the psyche doesn't work this way. The psyche moves at its own pace. Shadow work takes years. Integration is a lifelong process. True presence is built layer by layer through accumulated practice and accumulated confrontation with yourself. This isn't what people want to hear. They want the technique, the hack, the secret that will change everything right now. And there are techniques that help. But nothing replaces the slow work of becoming. Jung talked about this in terms of the relationship between ego and self. The ego wants quick results. The ego wants to be in control. The ego wants transformation to happen on its schedule. But the self has its own timing. The unconscious will not be rushed. Things emerge when they're ready to emerge. And trying to force the process only creates more resistance. So patience isn't just a virtue, it's a practical necessity. If you want to develop real presence, you have to be willing to practice for a long time before you see results. You have to trust that the work is working even when you don't see evidence. You have to keep going when nothing seems to be happening. And then one day, something shifts. You notice that you handled a situation differently than you would have before. You notice that you stayed calm when you would have reacted. You notice that people are responding to you differently, that something in your energy has changed. But you can't predict when this will happen. You can't force it. You can only keep practicing and trust that the seeds you're planting will eventually grow. This is the faith that inner work requires. Not religious faith, but faith in the process. Faith that the psyche knows what it's doing. Faith that consistent practice leads somewhere even if you can't see the destination. And ironically, this patience is itself a form of presence, the ability to be with what is without needing it to be different, the ability to tolerate the gap between where you are and where you want to be, the ability to keep going without reassurance. If you can develop this patience, you're already practicing what you're trying to develop. The calm you're seeking in results is available to you right now in the process. We're coming to the end now, and I want to leave you with something you can hold on to. Everything we've discussed today points in one direction, toward yourself, toward the inner work that no one else can do for you, toward the confrontation with shadow and the closing of gaps and the cultivation of stillness that turns ordinary presence into something that fills a room. You don't need anyone's permission to begin this work. You don't need special circumstances or the right teacher or more time. You only need willingness. Willingness to face what you've been avoiding. Willingness to feel what you've been suppressing. Willingness to become who you are instead of who you've been pretending to be. And you don't need to do it perfectly. You only need to do it consistently. Small moments of practice that accumulate into new patterns. Small confrontations with yourself that build into genuine transformation. The calm presence you've seen in others is not a genetic gift they received and you didn't. It's the result of work. Work they've done that you can also do. Work that is available to anyone willing to undertake it. Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And who you truly are is not anxious, not fragmented, not constantly seeking approval from others. Who you truly are is calm, whole, complete in yourself. The path there is through the shadow, through the persona, through the endless noise of the mind that tells you you're not enough. It's through stillness and breath and the patient accumulation of awareness. And at the end of that path, or maybe just further along it, you arrive somewhere surprising. You arrive at yourself, the self you always were underneath the performance, the self that was waiting for you to stop running and finally come home. That self has presence, not because it does anything special, but because it has stopped doing all the things that prevent presence. It has stopped leaking, seeking, performing, hiding. It has become simple, undivided, here. And that harness is what changes the room when you walk in. That harness is what people feel when they're around you. That harness is what speaks louder than any words. You already have this self inside you. It's not something to acquire. It's something to uncover. The work is not adding, but subtracting, removing the obstacles that prevent what's already there from shining through. So begin today, not tomorrow, not when conditions are right. Begin with one moment of stillness, one conscious breath, one decision to face something you've been avoiding, and then another, and another, and another, and another, and another, until one day you realize something has changed. You walk into a room and something is different, not because you're performing confidence, but because you are confidence. Not because you're trying to be calm, but because calm is what you've become. This is your birthright. This is what you're capable of. This is who you actually are. Go find out. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If something in this video touched you, leave a comment and tell me which insight landed most deeply. Your experience matters to me. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. There's more coming. Remember, you don't need to say a single word. Your presence is already speaking. The only question is what it's saying. Make sure it's saying something worth hearing.